7 clever ways the Bible teaches you to outsmart toxic people. Some of the deepest battles in life don't happen in public arguments or dramatic confrontations. They happen quietly, in conversations that leave you drained, relationships that slowly poison your peace, and interactions where you walk away wondering why your kindness is always used against you. Toxic people rarely announce themselves. They blend in. They smile. They quote scripture. They say the right things while doing the wrong ones. And if you're a believer who truly wants to love like Christ, this can feel confusing, even painful. Many Christians grow up thinking that being godly means being endlessly patient, endlessly available, endlessly forgiving, no not at the cost. But the Bible never calls wisdom weakness. It never commands you to stay where your soul is being crushed. And it never tells you to keep explaining yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. Jesus was loving, yes, but he was also discerning. He healed crowds, yet withdrew. He spoke truth, yet chose silence. He forgave, yet did not entrust himself to everyone. Toxic people thrive on reaction. They feed on emotional explanations, spiritual guilt, and your desire to keep the peace at all costs. They want you loud, defensive, and exhausted, but Scripture reveals a different path. One that is quiet, strong, and deeply unsettling to those who rely on manipulation. Godly wisdom doesn't shout. It doesn't argue endlessly. It tends calmly, firmly, and with purpose. In this message, we're not talking about revenge, confrontation, or proving who's right. We're talking about something far more powerful. We're talking about how smart believers walk away without bitterness, set boundaries without drama, and protect their peace without compromising their faith. We're talking about how the Bible teaches us to outsmart toxic behavior, not by becoming cold, but by becoming wise. If you've ever felt guilty for needing distance, confused about how to forgive without being used again, or tired of carrying emotional weight God never asked you to carry, this is for you. What you're about to hear isn't popular advice. It's biblical wisdom. And once you see it, you'll realize that silence, discernment, and quiet strength are not signs of defeat, but evidence of spiritual maturity. Number 1. Discern. Silence over explanation. One of the hardest lessons for kind, faith-filled people to learn is that not every situation deserves an explanation. When you're dealing with someone healthy, communication brings clarity. But with toxic people, explanations become weapons. The more you talk, the more material they collect. The more you explain, the more they twist your words. And before you know it, you're exhausted, confused, and questioning yourself while they feel energized and in control. The Bible shows us something surprising about wisdom. Sometimes it speaks, and sometimes it stays silent. Jesus did not answer every accusation. He did not correct every false assumption. There were moments when truth was present, yet he chose silence. Not because he was weak, but because the other heart was closed. Silence in those moments was not avoidance. It was discernment. Toxic people crave reaction. They want you emotional, defensive, and explaining yourself over and over. They want access to your thoughts, your intentions, your motives. Not because they seek understanding, but because confusion keeps them powerful. When you keep explaining, you unintentionally teach them how to manipulate you better. Silence interrupts that cycle. This doesn't mean you become cold or rude. It means you stop trying to be understood by someone who is committed to misunderstanding you. You stop answering questions that aren't asked in good faith. You stop defending your character to someone who has already decided on their narrative. You choose peace over performance. Silence also reveals truth. When you stop reacting, toxic behavior becomes more visible. Without your emotional responses, side behind their words begin to sound hollow. Their accusations lose momentum. Their control weakens. What once felt loud suddenly feels exposed. Smart believers understand this. You don't owe everyone access to your inner world. Wisdom knows when speaking bringing light and when silence lets darkness show itself. Choosing silence isn't losing your voice, it's using it wisely. When you learn to be quiet without resentment, calm without fear, and still without guilt, you begin to move with a different kind of authority. Not the authority of dominance, but the authority of discernment. And that kind of quiet strength unsettles toxic people more than any argument ever could. Number 2. Set boundaries without announcing them. One of the biggest mistakes well-meaning Christians make with toxic people is announcing their boundaries as if they are asking for permission. They explain, they justify, they warn, and in doing so, they turn boundaries into negotiations. But biblical wisdom shows us something very different. True boundaries are not speeches, they are decisions. Jesus did not gather people to explain why he was withdrawing. He simply withdrew. He did not argue about his limits. He lived them. When the crowd pressed too hard, he stepped away. When questions were asked with bad intentions, he changed the direction of the conversation, or ended it entirely. His boundaries were clear, but they were quiet. Toxic people don't respect boundaries because they are spoken. They respect them only when they are enforced. When you announce your limits to someone who thrives on control, you're handing them a map of where to push next. They will test you, challenge you spiritually, accuse you of being unloving, or twist scripture to make you feel guilty. That's why wisdom moves silently. Setting boundaries without announcing them means changing access, not attitudes. It means replying less, not explaining more. It means shortening conversations, not debating intentions. It means choosing distance without drama. You don't need to confront every behavior to correct it. Sometimes the correction is simply removal. This is not about punishment. It's about stewardship. The Bible tells us to guard our hearts, because from them flow the issues of life. Guarding does not require permission from those who benefit from your unguarded heart. It requires obedience to God. When you quietly shift your behavior, toxic people feel the change immediately. Even if you never say a word, they notice they no longer have the same access to your energy, your emotions, your time, and often that silent boundary speaks louder than any confrontation ever could. Wisdom doesn't argue its limits, it lives them, and when you stop explaining and start moving firmly, you'll discover that peace returns, not because the toxic person changed, but because you did. Number 3, stop feeding what God is exposing. There is a moment in many difficult relationships when God begins to reveal the truth. Not loudly, not all at once, but gradually. Patterns become clearer. Words don't line up with actions. The confusion you once felt starts to make sense. This is exposure. And yet this is often the very moment believers step in and undo what God is doing. Toxic people survive because someone keeps rescuing them from consequences. Someone explains away their behavior. Someone smooths things over, spiritualizes the damage, or takes the blame just to keep the peace. But wisdom knows when to step back. When God is bringing something into the light, interference only delays healing. The Bible repeatedly shows that exposure precedes deliverance. Darkness resists light, not because it's misunderstood, but because it's revealed. When you stop covering, excusing, or absorbing the damage, the truth begins to stand on its own. And that can feel uncomfortable, especially if you're used to being the peacemaker. Stopping the feed doesn't mean you become harsh or vengeful. It means you stop protecting what is harming you. You stop fixing what you didn't break. You stop taking responsibility for someone else's character. This requires trust. Trust that God does not need your help to reveal the truth. Toxic people often escalate when they sense exposure. They may accuse you, provoke you, or attempt to pull you back into the old cycle. This is the test. Will you return to silence, rescue, and explanation? Or will you remain still and let God finish what He started? Smart believers understand this principle deeply. What you keep feeding will keep growing. What you stop feeding will either change or collapse under its own weight. When you remove emotional energy, spiritual cover, and constant access, the truth has room to breathe. Sometimes the most faithful thing you can do is nothing at all. Step back. Stay quiet. Let action speak. God exposes what you no longer need to explain. And when you stop interfering, clarity finally arrives without you ever having to raise your voice. Number 4. Master emotional self-control through the Spirit. Toxic people don't win by being stronger. They win by getting inside your emotions. Once they can trigger anger, guilt, fear, or the need to prove yourself, they no longer have to control the situation. You do it for them. That's why emotional self-control is not just a personality trait, it's a spiritual weapon. The Bible describes self-control as a fruit of the Spirit, not a natural talent. This means it isn't about suppressing feelings or pretending you are unaffected. It's about choosing who governs your reactions. When the Spirit leads, emotions serve wisdom instead of ruling it. Jesus was never emotionally reckless. He felt compassion deeply, but he was never manipulated by pressure. He could weep and still walk away. He could feel righteous anger and still remain in control. His calm presence was not passivity. It was authority under restraint. Toxic people are unsettled by this kind of composure. They expect quick reactions, emotional explanations, or visible distress. When those reactions don't come, they lose leverage. Calm responses break their script. Short answers interrupt their momentum. Your peace becomes a mirror that exposes their chaos. This doesn't mean you ignore your emotions. It means you process them in the right place. You take your pain to God, not to the person who caused it. You let prayer absorb what arguments never could. You choose stillness over reaction, wisdom over impulse. Emotional self-control also protects your spiritual clarity. When you're emotionally hijacked, discernment becomes cloudy. But when you remain steady, you can see situations for what they truly are, not how they feel in the moment. Smart believers know this. You don't need to match someone's intensity to prove strength. True strength is remaining anchored when everything around you tries to pull you off center. When the Spirit governs your reactions, toxic people lose their greatest advantage and your peace becomes unshakable. Number 5. Withdraw access, not love. One of the most misunderstood ideas in Christianity is the belief that love requires unlimited access. Many believers stay connected to toxic people long after the relationship has become harmful because they confuse forgiveness with closeness. But the Bible never commands you to give continued access to someone who consistently wounds you. Love and access are not the same thing. You can love someone and still limit their influence. You can forgive someone and still guard your heart. Jesus loved everyone, yet he did not entrust himself to everyone. He knew the hearts of men, and his love was guided by discernment, not obligation. Toxic people often use spiritual language to keep their access to you. They may accuse you of being unloving, unforgiving, or unchristian when you create distance. But wisdom recognizes this for what it is: manipulation disguised as spirituality. Love does not require self-betrayal. Withdrawing access means changing how much of you someone is allowed to reach. It means they no longer get your vulnerability or time, your emotional energy, or your private thoughts. It doesn't require confrontation. It requires consistency. You respond differently. You share less. You protect what is sacred. This kind of distance often feels uncomfortable at first, especially if you are naturally compassionate. But peace begins to return when you stop reopening wounds that God is trying to heal. Space creates clarity. Distance restores perspective. What makes this approach powerful is that it removes drama. You're not cutting people off in anger. You're not making announcements. You're simply aligning your behavior with wisdom. Toxic people feel the shift immediately, even if you never explain it. Smart believers understand that love does not mean proximity. Sometimes love looks like prayer from a distance. And when you withdraw access without withdrawing compassion, you honor both your heart and your faith without becoming hardened or bitter. Number 6. Let God defend what you refuse to fight. One of the most exhausting traps toxic people set is pulling you into battles that were never meant to be yours. They provoke, they accuse, they twist narratives and wait for you to react. And when you do, the conflict grows, but the truth never really moves forward. Wisdom knows when to step out of the fight entirely. The Bible is clear about this. Some battles belong to God alone. When you constantly defend yourself, you unknowingly remove space for God to work. You try to clear your name, prove your heart, and correct every false story. But Scripture shows that God defends those who trust Him more effectively than any argument ever could. Jesus did not chase reputation. He did not argue with every false witness. He allowed truth to stand on its own, even when silence looked like loss. And in time, God vindicated Him completely. This is not passive surrender. It is active trust. Toxic people rely on your participation. They need your reaction to sustain the conflict. When you refuse to fight, the dynamic collapses. Accusations lose power when no one is arguing back. Manipulation weakens when it finds no resistance to push against. Letting God defend you also protects your spirit. Fighting drains energy, clarity, and peace. Trust restores them. When you step back, you're not saying the injustice didn't happen. You're saying it doesn't own you. You hand the weight to the only one strong enough to carry it. This requires faith. Faith to believe that God sees what others don't. Faith to believe that truth does not need your anxiety to survive. Faith to walk away without bitterness, knowing that time and light reveal everything. Smart believers learn this deeply. When you stop fighting for control, you make room for divine justice. And when God defends you, the outcome is cleaner, clearer, and far more powerful than anything you could have orchestrated yourself. Number 7. Rise in character while they stay the same. The final and most powerful way to outsmart toxic people is not through strategy, silence, or boundaries alone. It is growth. Toxic people depend on stagnation. They rely on you staying emotionally accessible, spiritually predictable, and mentally tied to old patterns. When you begin to rise in character, the entire dynamic shifts without a single word being spoken. Spiritual growth changes what you tolerate. Emotional maturity changes what affects you. Wisdom changes what you engage with. As you grow, certain behaviors that once confused or hurt you no longer have the same impact, not because the person changed, but because you did. The Bible consistently shows that elevation separates. As God develops your character, some people can no longer walk beside you. This is not punishment. It is alignment. When your values deepen and your discernment sharpens, toxic behavior becomes obvious and unappealing. Toxic people often react strongly to your growth. They may accuse you of changing, becoming distant, or thinking you're better than them. In reality, they're responding to lost control. Your peace exposes their unrest. Your stability highlights their chaos. And this contrast is uncomfortable for those who thrive on dysfunction. Rising in character means you no longer need to announce boundaries. They're visible. You no longer need to explain yourself. Your life speaks. You no longer need to prove your heart. Your consistency does that quietly over time. This is not about superiority. It's about stewardship. God refines you so that your life reflects Him more clearly. And as that reflection strengthens, toxic connections naturally lose their grip. Smart believers understand this truth. Growth is the quiet exit. While others remain trapped in the same cycles, you move forward, lighter, clearer, and freer, and without confrontation, without revenge, And without noise, you outgrow what once tried to control you. Conclusion. The Bible never promises that you won't encounter toxic people, but it does promise wisdom for navigating them without losing yourself. What God offers is not a louder voice, a sharper argument, or a dramatic exit, but a quieter strength that protects your soul. Choosing silence over explanation, boundaries over arguments, growth over reaction. These are not acts of fear. They are acts of faith. Faith that God sees what you don't need to prove. Faith that truth doesn't need your anxiety to survive. Faith that peace is worth protecting, even when it means disappointing others. You were never called to carry emotional burdens God did not assign to you. You were never commanded to stay entangled in cycles that damage your spirit. And you were never meant to confuse endurance with wisdom. Sometimes the most Christ-like response is not confrontation, but clarity. Not distance fueled by bitterness, but distance guided by discernment. As you walk forward, remember this. Toxic people lose power when you stop feeding them your energy. They fade when you stop reacting. They are exposed when you remain calm. And they are outgrown when you rise in character and maturity. Let God be your defender. Let wisdom guide your steps. And let peace become your evidence. Not that you avoided conflict, but that you trusted God enough to walk away from what He never asked you to fight.